朋友们，福特的 CEO 接受了媒体的采访，在采访当中聊到了中国新能源电动车的发展。女主持人呢，在中间问了一个问题，说我们对华为、对 Tik 都有很多安全疑虑。瞬间呢，福特 CEO 都有点着急了，直接回怼：我们先别讨论华为和 Tik 了，先管管汽车吧。言下之意，再不管我们都快不行了。这个视频呢，我放在节目的后半段，我得先说几个观点，就3个。第一个，美国的电动车注定是干不过中国的，不用挣扎了，没有用，因为全产业链都控制在中国手里面，全球很多的矿产控制在中国人手里面，冶炼技术在中国手里面，电池制造的所有技术都控制在中国人手里，包括其他软件、硬件技术全部在中国手里面。而且中国还有一大优势，我们呢制造成本相对更低，所以美国人拿什么与中国进行竞争啊？不要去谈特斯拉，特斯拉能够成功是因为它享受了中国供应链的便利。特斯拉如果在美国生产，它做不到现在这个程度，那不知道它的价格会是现在的几倍呢？那怎么可能占有这么大的市场份额呢？对不对？所以说，即便是特斯拉，也是依赖于中国的供应链，它才能够发展到现在。这一点，没有人比马斯克更加清楚。第二个观点，中国对美国形成优势的行业只会越来越多。美国主持人说到的华为，说到的 Tik， 很明显，今年华为在手机方面的影响力超越了苹果。从媒体报道都可以看得出来，华为最新的产品没有产生多大的水花。再经过几部手机的迭代，我估计它可能就会彻底败北。苹果之所以还能够在全球范围之内获得这么大的份额，一方面是因为产品质量还不错，但是更多的是因为政治原因。因为政治原因，人家不去让华为售卖，那当然没有办法了，对不对？当然了 ，TikTok 在短视频媒体领域可以说打遍天下无敌手，对不对？这都是中国对美国形成优势的行业，而且将来我相信一定会越来越多。美国唯一能拿得出手的东西，其实呢就是芯片，无论是手机芯片还是人工智能芯片。但是这靠的其实是政治能力，而不是产业能力。因为这些芯片归根结底呢，也是华人制造出来的，对不对？台积电也是台湾的公司，只是被美国抢去的而已啊。所以靠的其实还是政治能力，而不是美国的产业能力。美国的产业能力在这几十年其实是在走下坡路的，因为它的汽车是被日本逐步拿下来，芯片行业呢又被韩国、台湾等拿下来，将来呢估计逐步会被中国拿下来，对不对？所以说它的产业其实这几十年一直在逐渐没落，逐渐没落。第三，中国的目标可不仅仅是在产业上超越美国，如果只是这一点，有点小看中国人的胃口了。中国人要做的事情呢，是颠覆美国的霸权基础。美国的霸权基础就包括美元、美军、美国媒体。所以中国如果要进行颠覆，那是成系统各个层次的。中国军队要超越美军，中国的货币、中国的产业都要完全超过美军，你才可以。所以说它是经济、文化、金融、社会各个层面，因为它特别成体系，所以说它花费的时间一定会非常长，没有个几十年根本完不成。而中国真正对美国形成挑战积累的时间，也就是从中国加入世界贸易组织开始，也就是20多年的时间，估计要不了10年时间，中国就能够完成了。 所以充其量也就30多年的时间，这个速度已经非常快了。你看美国替代英国用了多长时间，而且还经历了2次世界大战才完成呢？中国极有可能在不进行世界大战的情况之下完成这一壮举，有可能的。所以现在最着急的其实是美国啊，他千方百计的在中国周边挑起战争，要打乱中国的步骤，无论在南海也好，在台湾周边也罢，他特别想让中国卷入战争，所以说通过各种手段来散布一些消息，让中国卷入战争。中国现在呢，不到万不得已，绝对不能卷入战争。我们如果卷入战争，你放心，普京都能笑掉大牙，美国都能笑掉大牙啊！中国一定是暗暗吃亏那一方。所以说，别看有很多美国媒体在进行煽动，我们一定要知道，如果真的发生战争，一定是中国主动发起的，绝对不能被动卷入。
China is making very inexpensive EVs
They are.
and has better infrastructure for charging.
Yes, and all the trillions of profitability that were taken out of China by the Western OEMs, they were busy thinking about their industry strategically, and they bet on electrification about 10 years ago. And now they make 70% of all electric vehicles in the world are made in one country. They own all the battery processing. You want graphite, you want lithium processed to put in a battery, automotive battery, a nickel, you need to go to China. So they have unique battery chemistry like LFP, iron phosphate, which is half the cost, has no fire risk, and can be charged twice as many cycles. So there's unique IP in China now. And many of the companies are sponsored by the government. So we as a company face a kind of ultimate fitness test on this question of making money on EVs. If we cannot make money on EVs, we have competitors who have the largest market in the world, who already dominate globally, who are already setting up their supply chain around the world, and if we don't make profitable EVs next 5 years, what's the future? We just shrink into North America.
So to talk a little bit more about competition with China, how do you see the Biden administration's tariffs on EVs impacting the Chinese government and how they approach you and Ford and also other automakers?
Yes. Well, I think it's the answer to that question is very different for each auto company. We do not have a big China business. GM has a huge one. Volkswagen has enormous. I think 60% of Volkswagen's global profit comes from China. So every company has a different exposure. Look, I think the tariffs and the policy decisions that the president has to make quickly will level the playing field. The state subsidies of free taxes, free land, a lot of R&D, we don't have the benefit from. The IRA really does help. It incentivizes us for making automotive batteries in the U.S. We made many decisions to actually make in the U.S. now because of the IRA. But the biggest issue is those are going to be speed bumps. I worked at Toyota for 25 years as an American. I mean, we have NAFTA. They're 25% of the Mexican market already, the Chinese. We can all drive to Mexico one day. 1 out of every 4 vehicles sold in Mexico is made by a Chinese company. And they will have enough scale in China to build plants there and export tariff-free to the U.S. That's only a matter of time. That's why we have to be fully fit. That's why we created Skunk Works, because we have to compete against the Chinese players. And the biggest thing the administration has to do on creating a level playing field is that people don't really realize how technologically risky these products are. The new vehicles that we're making at Ford or any of the Western OEMs are data collection machines. We have to run the vehicles. So they're like mobile drones. We have 8 cameras on the average Ford. Who you talk to, where you go, who you drive by, and in China, we're not allowed to to park a Ford next to a government building because of all those cameras. So what is the administration going to do about data privacy? In China, they have those rules. We do not have them in the U.S.
We're talking about concerns about TikTok, but what you're talking about...
Forget about Huawei and TikTok. Think about a Chinese vehicle and what their government could learn about our country, let alone partial electrification. You can crash the car in anything you want, remotely. So these vehicles, so in China, if we want to get our partial electric hands-free AV approved, we have to go through their Defense Department. Elon was just there getting it. By the way, Elon deserves a lot of credit for this journey about electrification. He really does. But back to China, for our national defense, we have to make up our mind. What kind of approval should we send a Chinese OEM's self-driving system through in our country? These are the real policy decisions. And then we have to get serious about being independent, about processing raw materials and mining. Again, whether we do it with friendly countries like Canada or other places like South America, or do it ourselves, or else we're just trading one dependency for another.
And so talk a little bit more about that and this idea of the raw materials that are so essential for the batteries, and also the chips that you need to use.
Yes, 95% of the value of a battery, whether it's in your phone or in a car that's electric, is the raw materials. In an NCM cell, that's cobalt, nickel, and lithium. You can mine it, but you have to be processed. You also need graphite to make a battery. So those four essential materials, plus the rare earths that make the magnets to go in your electric motor, all have to come from somewhere.
And how do you think about Ford's independence on this?
We decided to, because we don't have the battery IP in the U.S., so we went to South Korean and Japanese companies and some Chinese companies, and we said, look, we're going to buy your batteries, but your raw material ecosystem has to be okay with us. So we're not only going to require you to redo your ecosystem, where you mine, where you process, but we're going to have governance around child labor, corruption, all the other things that we need to inspect. It's super important for our reputation. We're a family 120-year-old company. I'm not going to take a risk on that. And so we went to friendly countries. But the government hasn't really required that. There's an incentive in the IRA to do it that way, but it's not required. And with the Chinese coming here, we're going to face this raw material. And then semiconductors are the same. We have 1,500 semiconductors in the average Ford. Not all of them are 2-nanometer advanced AI chips. Many of them are just industrial chips that raise and lower your window digitally, or remotely operate your brake pedal. And more of those are made in China. Not for Ford, but we have $8,000 worth of silicon chips in the average Ford. And there's a lot of pressure to save 10% to go to the cheapest player. So will Americans pay more for semiconductors that are made in places that are friendly to the U.S.? I don't know.